Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our online audience. Welcome to today's webinar where we will be exploring how violence can be prevented in schools. My name is Jody van der Heyde. I am based in the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies, and my role is to coordinate the Inspire working group. I will be chairing today's event. There are a couple of guidelines for today's event. Please keep your microphones and cameras turned off until we reach the Q&A portion of today's event. The Q&A section will be conducted using the hand raising function that you can find in the chat function, and you can find the raise hand function there. Please note that we will evaluate this event using a poll. This is completely anonymous and helps us to present better events in the future. Kindly do take a moment to complete it. We will launch it after the presentation portion of today's event. As we wait for the final participants to connect their audio, we kindly remind you to please keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off until we reach the Q&A session, which will be after both presenters. Kindly note that since this is a public event being broadcast live on YouTube, Chatham House rules do not apply. This year, the Institute for Security Studies, the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, and the Inspire Working Group has jointly hosted a series of 7 Inspire webinars this year. Inspire, the 7 Strategies for Ending Violence Against Children, is the leading evidence-based technical package designed for countries in preventing and responding to violence against children. I will be sharing Inspire resources and links in the chat throughout today's event. We have convened an Inspire webinar every month this year, so please feel free to check that out on our website, and we will host one more before the end of the year, so please be on the lookout for that. We are well aware of the role education has played in our lives. Gains in education for both boys and girls, as measured by school enrollment and attendance, protect both against the victimization and perpetration of violence. The education and life skill strategy in the Inspire package is about increasing children's access to more effective, gender-equitable education and social emotional learning and life skills training. It is also about ensuring that schools itself are safe environments for children. Unfortunately, we know that many children from across the world are not safe in their schools, and many experience violence in a place where they are meant to be safe and enjoy. On the other hand, since children gather in schools on a daily basis, it serves as an excellent site for the implementation of interventions at scale. There is global evidence that education and school-based programs are effective at preventing violence against children. But how do these interventions work, and what are some key ingredients for the successful implementation of them? We are very grateful to have 2 experts with us today who will share their experiences, lessons learned, and challenges on the implementation of successful school-based programs. And these are interventions that are implemented in the Global South. We will be together for the next hour and a half, and we really intend for this to be a conversation. So we encourage engagement from the audience. So please feel free to pop your questions, comments, reflections in the chat throughout the event. In terms of how we will structure the conversation, each panelist will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and thereafter I will open up to the floor for a wider Q&A session. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Yvonne Larooney. She has over 12 years of experience working with schools to prevent violence against children. She currently serves as the program manager for the Good Schools team at Raising Voices. In this role, she supervises the implementation of the Good Schools Toolkit in over 1,400 primary and secondary schools across Uganda. Yvonne holds a BA in Human Resource Management from Moderator University Business School and a postgraduate diploma in Project Management from Uganda Management Institute. She is currently pursuing a master's in Management Studies at the same education. Yvonne will share a little bit about the mental health model in the Good Schools Toolkit. Yvonne, please go ahead when you are ready. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jody. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening from wherever you're joining from. I'm joining from Uganda, and so it's a good afternoon. The sun is quite bright where I'm joining from. I'm so happy to be on this call today and to share our experience of what we've been doing to prevent violence against children and some of the adaptations that we've made along the way. As I've been introduced, I may not add anything much to what Jody has already shared. I think we'll go straight away into our presentation. So I'll be sharing experiences from the mental health module, which is an adaptation that we recently made, and it complements the Good School Toolkit. I'll start my presentation by briefly talking about raising voices. I know some people in this space are a bit familiar with it, but we also have some new people who may not be familiar with raising voices. So it's a Ugandan-based organization that was founded in 1999. It's non-profit. And the organization works to prevent violence against children and women. We strive to influence the power dynamics that shape different relationships. So it could be relationships between men and women. It could also be relationships between adults. It could also be relationships between girls and boys, relationships between peers. And so we really believe that when we influence this, then we are able to have nonviolent communities and schools. We use evidence-based methodologies to prevent violence against women and children. For schools, we use a methodology called the Good Schools Toolkit. And for women in communities, we use a methodology called the SASA methodology. I'm glad to report to this working group that all these methodologies have been recommended under the 7 strategies of INSPIRE. And so we really feel honored for that. One is under education, and the other is around the social norms. So, but today I'll be focusing more on the Good School Toolkit, really, because that is where most of our work is for preventing violence against children in schools. Briefly about the Good School Toolkit. It's a school-wide behavior change intervention aimed to influence schools' operational culture and create opportunities for all to shape the learning environment at school. It has been developed and implemented by Raising Voices. The toolkit was first developed in 2006, and over time it's gone through a series of revisions. This toolkit is implemented by teachers who are supported by students and affiliated community members who form committees that work alongside the lead teachers, whom we refer to as teacher protagonists. The toolkit has been tested and found to be effective for preventing violence against children in school. In the picture there, that is some of the content of what you would find in a Good School Toolkit. So it comprises of posters, handbooks, cartoon booklets, that all these things brought together provide information and ideas and resources that schools can use to change their culture. Because we believe violence thrives in our culture. And so if we are to prevent violence against children in school, we cannot just have a one event or one activity. We need to have a school-wide behavioral change that can shape the culture of the school for the school to become a non-violent, for it to have a non-violent culture. And when the school has a non-violent culture, then definitely the children will be safe because there will be no violence in the school. So that is briefly about the Good School Toolkit, but I'll be going back and forth even as I talk about the module. So maybe to give a brief history of the mental health module, our work around mental health goes way back from as early as 2012, when we conducted a randomized control trial to find out the efficacy of the Good School Toolkit in preventing violence against children from support staff. We asked a few questions around mental health. When the results came out from that study, they were quite impressive because within a period of 18 months, there was a reduction of violence from staff to physical violence from staff to learners by 42%. We also asked other questions, for example, around learning outcomes and things like that. One thing that really came out was for the mental health, we did not see any significant changes. We had hoped that, when we address the learning environment, then definitely it would give us the results we wanted. We went back to the drawing board. Of course, at that time we had lots of, we did a bit of investigation and interrogation around our own selves. And we're wondering, was it because of the tools? Did we use the right tools? Did we ask the right questions? What could have caused this? Because we all know that when you prevent violence against children, definitely it will improve their mental health. But one of the things that we also discovered is while there could be a reduction in violence against children, there are some cases, mental health problems or challenges or mental health needs that may not necessarily be tagged to violence. For example, if a child is experiencing grief, if a child is coming from a family that is having challenges, because one of the things the children reported when we were conducting a research was the issue of poverty, them not being able to meet their school needs. It was causing them a lot of anxiety, causing them a lot of shame, like they would look at their peers in class and they are the ones always being sent home because they could not meet the school needs. And so there are things like that, that even where there is no violence, there are other needs that violence alone may not be able to resolve. And so we decided to develop the mental health module to complement what we're already doing in schools to prevent violence. And so it's a holistic approach that aims to integrate mental health into school life, create awareness, and also reduce stigma for those who could be experiencing mental health problems. It complements the violence prevention strategies of the Good School Toolkit. One thing we have discovered while implementing this work is that the mental health module is more effective in a school that already has some kind of intervention to prevent violence against children. It sits well, it sits better where there's already something addressing violence against children. These are some of the materials. So maybe just to go back, what you see there is what the module looks like. And these are some of the additional materials that you could find in the module. There's a cartoon booklet around asking people how they are taking care of their mental health. And there's a very small poster just really creating awareness on what mental health is. The aim of this module is, one, to reduce stigma. And when we are talking about stigma, we are not only talking about learners, we are also talking about the teachers themselves. Remember the very first time we wanted to venture into this work, when we visited a few primary schools, we were asking teachers, do you have mental health? Do you think your learners have mental health? And the teachers were saying, no, we don't have mental health. We cannot allow anyone with mental health in our school. And so we really realized they didn't even have an understanding of what this mental health was. Because for most people, especially in a country like mine, the moment you talk about mental health, the first thing they are going to think about is people who are suffering from severe mental illness. And they're not really thinking about mental health in its real sense, the good, the bad, the positive, the negative. And so we realized there was a lot of stigma. So one of the aims of this module is to reduce stigma. The other is to encourage shared language and open conversations on mental health. While interacting with learners, we discovered that they feel something. They know what they are feeling deep down, but they cannot express what they are feeling. They don't have language for it. And so if these children, even the teachers themselves, if they are ready to get the right support, then they need to have language that, a child can go to a teacher and say, I'm feeling like this and this and this, and I think what I'm feeling looks like anxiety. Then the teacher can know how to support. And so trying to give them a common language, a shared language, it makes it a lot easier for them to seek support. Then we're also advocating for safe spaces where teachers, learners, school administrations can openly begin to talk about mental health, the mental health problems, and that people can find support. This module also seeks to help people develop practical skills for addressing common mental health problems in schools. And then we are also developing skills for recognizing and managing. It's one thing to have the skills to address, but if you can't recognize that, there is a problem here, then you may not also be able to address. And then ultimately, we want cultures that can promote positive mental health, that teachers, school administrators, students, and even parents who have children in those schools can consciously be thinking about everyone's mental health. So we are looking at the collective bit of it, and that everyone feels that they are taken care of and that the school meets their mental health needs. So overall, this is what the module seeks to achieve. These are some of the topics of discussion. So the module is organized into 6 discussions that schools, teachers have these discussions, the students also have these discussions. And after they've had the discussions, there are recommended activities for them to implement over a period of 1 month to just help consolidate the ideas that they have learned. And after they have really consolidated the ideas with the rest of the school, then they can move to the next discussion, do the same thing, move to the next discussion and do the same thing. So the topics that we picked out were, one was exploring mental health. And here we just really wanted to unpack the concept of mental health. What is mental health? What does positive mental health look like? How do I know that I could be experiencing mental health problems? Then we also look at things like mental health and violence against children. What is the relationship between mental health and violence against children? So we are just unpacking the concept of mental health to the schools. And then after that, we now dive deep into understanding the common mental health problems in schools and their symptoms. And of course, you might find that some of the common mental health problems amongst the children in Ugandan schools may be a bit different from those in other schools, especially looking at the environment and the context. And so we are dwelling on the ones that are common, based on research, based on our own experiences, based on what other scholars within the country are saying. And so we are providing information, for example, around things like anxiety, things like depression, substance abuse, attention deficit disorders. And one thing that, we are still really helping people appreciate that is also a mental health problem is the issue of shame, the feeling of inadequacy. So we've also talked about it. And recently, while having a review with the officials from government, they also asked us to add something around suicidal thoughts and tendencies. So those are some of the topics that we really unpack when we get to this point. And then we talk about self-care. I know we really had a bit of discussion around the arrangement for 3 and 4. But we realized that, before even people think about helping others, they themselves need to be in a very good place where they are taking care of their own mental health needs before they can support others. And so we talk about self-care. There are different activities and ideas that schools can use, and teachers and learners that they can use to really take care of their mental well-being. And then when they're at that place, they can now start supporting others. So topic 4 is really more around how do we support learners, but also teachers experiencing mental health problems. And then how do we create an enabling environment for the collective mental well-being of everyone? That after supporting others, then we need this school culture where everyone is taking responsibility of the other, everyone is accountable to the other, and we've created this environment that allows everyone's mental well-being to thrive. And after that, the last discussion is really more around consolidation and sustainability. After all this has been said and done, how do we ensure that we maintain the gains from what we have learned? So those are some of the topics. This module has been developed over a period of 2 years. And this year, we conducted a pilot late last year, which ended in April of this year. We did it for 6 months, just like the module suggests. So we had 2 primary schools and 2 high schools. And one of the things we wanted to identify the issues. We wanted to receive feedback. We also wanted to see if this module was really feasible and if schools could find it relevant. One of the things that came out was that the students took lead. while teachers are having discussions and students having also their separate discussions, the students ran with the module, especially in secondary schools, in primary schools. They really embraced it, they accepted it. They had a few challenges. For example, there are places where they needed a teacher to be around in some of those discussions to provide them a bit of clearer explanations, but also to support. And then 82% of all those who engaged with the module found it highly engaging or very engaging. The schools found the content relevant and helpful for addressing mental health concerns. One of the things that we celebrate was the teachers came back to us and told us, for once, you have developed something that is also for us. Because most times you're telling us, prevent violence against children, have good relationships with your students, take care of your students, do not use violence. But no one ever thinks about us and our needs. But in this module, you're also thinking about the teacher. You're thinking about my mental health needs. And so I feel like you have something for me. And it was widely accepted in all the schools that we worked with. But we think this happened, okay, not we think, we documented 2 reasons. One was that these schools had already used the Good School Toolkit. So there was already a good landing for the module. They already knew about violence, they knew about its implications. And then also because the teachers in those schools felt like we cared for them. And so they embraced the module because there were sessions and activities that were clearly for promoting the mental well-being of teachers. So that is briefly about the pilot. From all this work that we have done and the different studies that we have conducted as an organization, these are some of the things that we have seen and some of the recommendations that we are sharing with others. Number 1 is that there is need to create a supportive, violence-free environment for all learners. One thing that clearly comes out is there's a very close relationship between violence and mental health. Last week, I was in the technical working group. So in Uganda, we have a technical working group that brings together different organizations and officials from the Ministry of Education. These are government officials into a round table to talk about issues on mental health. And the researchers were sharing what they had discovered when they conducted the mapping exercise. And the number 1 item on the list was that, 78% of the learners had reported, they were experiencing, 78% of the learners who were experiencing mental health problems had reported that they were also experiencing violence. So violence at school, but also violence at home. So other factors came secondary, but the primary cause that most students were reporting was the issue of violence. So let's continue preventing violence against children in school. Let's continue creating safe environments if we really want to create if we really want to promote the mental well-being of the students and the teachers. And then there's also need to prioritize mental health training and self-care for educators. While doing this work, we discover that there is really little knowledge and very few resources out there around mental health. There's still a lot of stigma. There are still so many myths and misconceptions about mental health. And so there's really need to continue training the educators on this. Then we need to provide students with tools for peer support and coping strategies. While doing this work, one thing we discovered, because while doing some of the focus group discussions and observations, most of the students reported that their biggest support groups and coping strategies were conversations with their peers. But remember, even these peers don't also have this knowledge. They don't have this information. They don't have the resources. And so we really need to equip these children, the students, with as much information as possible so that they can support others, but also show them different opportunities for coping with the different challenges they could be having. Then we need to engage them in decision-making, especially around things that affect them directly. There is need to connect extracurricular activities to the mental well-being. So we discovered, for example, schools in Uganda, they have different clubs, they have time for sports, physical education, music, drama, entertainment, they watch movies, gardening. They have all these things happening. but they do not see the relationship between what they are doing and mental health. So there is need to help them understand so that the next time they are doing this, they are quite intentional about what they are doing, knowing how well it will contribute to their mental well-being. Then we also need to tailor activities to the diverse needs and ensure that resources are accessible to all students. One thing that has come out in this work is that for children, especially those with different disabilities, there needs to be some kind of, you need to tailor, whether it's an activity or a session, to meet their needs. When we are doing these interventions, you cannot have everything a one size fits all. You may need to think about, what do I do for students who are like this? What do we do for students who are like this? What do we do for the girls? What do we do for the boys? What do we do for the students who are already experiencing mental health disorders and things like that? So we really, teachers need to be very intentional around how they implement these activities and how they pass on this information to ensure that it's relevant to the diverse needs of the learners in the school. And then the last recommendation is that we need to advocate for the implementation of the mental health module in the different schools in Uganda. So we are working with government to do that. This is my last slide. These are the plans we have for the future. One of them is to enhance the feedback. We are almost at the tail end of this enhancement of the feedback from the module, but we also had CSOs go through the module, those working in the field of mental health. We also had Ministry of Education officials, government officials reviewing and sharing their feedback. And the reason we did this is because we want it to go as a national resource. So government can only accept it if they have been involved in its development or in its review. And so we are glad to report that we've successfully done that. And then we also are planning a wider rollout. So before end of this year, we shall be rolling out to 400 secondary schools. And then we also want this to be endorsed as a national guide for different schools to hold conversations on mental health. Our long-term vision is that, the learning environment prioritizes the mental well-being and non-violence, and that it cultivates a culture of safety, respect, and inclusivity in all the schools. So we are really doing this with a hope that these will be the results we see going forward. In conclusion, the need for mental health support in schools is more critical now, more than ever before, especially after the aftermath of the pandemic. Like, there are lots of mental health needs in schools for both the learners, but also the teachers. That the mental health module represents a proactive approach to addressing mental health needs for students and teachers. It is not a medical intervention. So we are looking at more of the preventive bit of it. So we are not treating, but we are looking at the prevention. And then the call to action is for all of us to advocate for the integration of mental health, especially where there are violence interventions. I think mental health should also strongly come out for any organization that is working to prevent violence against children. This was a quote from one of the students, and it was a reflection from them, and they're saying we need to talk about our feelings and support one another to create a safer environment. So they have lots of needs, they have lots of things but bottled up, and they need that environment that can allow them to openly talk about how they are feeling. Thank you so much for listening. Those are some of the resources to learn more about our work. There you can access the poster, you can access the cartoon booklet, you can access a blog post on what schools can do to promote the mental well-being of learners. Some of the notes when we had just started learning about this concept of mental health. And then recently we published an article on the impact of COVID-19 on the school, the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of adolescents. We're trying to understand how the school closures affected the mental health of adolescents. So that's a very new article that we published after a study that was conducted a year ago. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. Back to you, Jody.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. This is really incredible work. I think the two things that stood out for me is that you include teachers and school staff in the program as well, and that it's not only about the learners. And I think that's something that we're beginning to realize in South Africa, that we need to include teachers as well. I think the second thing is that I love the focus on stigma or destigmatizing mental health, as well as talking about shame, because those can be quite isolating experiences, which can have, you know, another negative impact on children's mental health. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure we all have a number of questions and comments, but I ask you can either pop it in the chat or we can hold it, please, till we are done with the next presentation. So with that, I think we should move straight on. Thank you very much again, Yvonne. It is now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker to you all. It is my pleasure to introduce Maria Lucia Urube, who is the Executive Director of Arigato International in Geneva. In her role, she heads the strategic implementation and expansion of the Ethics Education for Children initiative in more than 30 countries. She is also in charge of developing and maintaining Arigato International's engagement in child rights initiatives with UN agencies and child rights-focused NGOs in Geneva. She is on the executive committee of Child Right Connect, and she is a member of the G20 Interfaith Forum Working Group on Education. Maria, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you when you are ready.
Thank you so much, Jody. A pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for for having me here to share about our programs. And Yvonne, thank you also for sharing this very good work that you are doing, and so important to work on mental health issues. And so congratulations also for all the work that you are doing in Uganda. I'm going to be speaking about ethics education for children, and I'm going to be sharing a program. I'm going to share some slides as well. A program that we have been implementing in several countries. We have been working in 6 countries systematically, but for many years, for more than 20 years, Arigato International has developed expertise on what we call learning to live together, which is how we create more inclusive environments and safe environments for children to learn to live together with others, to decrease bullying in schools, to create supporting environments to support the social and emotional well-being of children. So I'm gonna present some slides, just projecting here. Can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. And so this particular project that I'm going to be sharing, it's what we call the Ethics Education Fellowship. And I'm going to be sharing the results that we had of a monitoring and evaluation process that we concluded in these 6 countries. So we have worked with ministries of education of 6 countries in Asia and Africa. Those countries are in Africa, those are Kenya, Seychelles, and Mauritius, and in Asia, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. And in this period of implementation, we monitored 324 teachers in these 6 locations and 8,034 children. And this ethics education fellowship also started as a collaboration with different initiatives, with different organizations, Arigato International, in collaboration also with UNESCO, and then the UNESCO national commissions in each of these countries that initiated the contact with the ministries of education. So we are working directly with the ministries of education to integrate this ethics education program in their schools. And we are now starting the 2nd year of implementation. And the results that I'm showing are from last year when we had the first phase of the implementation. But some of you might be wondering what is ethics education and what does ethics education have to do with prevention of violence in schools. So ethics education nurtures ethical values and equips children with life skills by employing transformative pedagogical approaches that place the child at the center of the learning, enhance their ability to think critically, make ethical decisions, and learn to work collaboratively with others across different differences, religious, cultural, other differences, and to empower the child to make positive contributions in their communities. And this is very much in line with the Inspire on education and life skills to support the social and emotional well-being of children, strengthen the life skills for them to learn to solve conflicts, to develop positive relationship with others, and to be able also to decrease violence against other children or among children in schools. Ethics education looks at how education helps build positive relationship between learners in the school and the community. So it doesn't limit itself to what happens in the classroom, but how children can reproduce this in the society as a whole, how learning environments are safe, inclusive, and conducive to supporting learners to engage in dialogue across differences, reflect, connect, develop themselves and their identities, their sense of who they are independently of their differences with others, and collaborate towards common issues to transform their community. So it has a big emphasis also on empowering the child and the agency of the child to be able to address the issues that affect them. It also looks at the way education is delivered and how education can be more inclusive of diversity, more responsive to social issues that affect children. So very often in our programs, it is not a program that comes from Switzerland and then is imposed in different locations. It's really much adapted to what are the issues that affect children in their societies, what are the needs, what are the dynamics, political dynamics, or also dynamics between different geographical groups or ethnic groups in the community. So it's very much adapted to those needs and how children experience exclusion, violence in their own communities, and how it connects and brings the learning to the community. So a very important aspect of this program is how what children learn, it is also reproduced in the community. So there is a very huge emphasis on child-led actions so that they can take these actions in their classroom, maybe to other classrooms, the entire school, to their families, and also other aspects of the community. This particular program, the Ethics Education Fellowship, was designed to foster global citizenship competences in children, which are basically life skills plus social behaviors, and to promote more peaceful and inclusive societies. And we have three main pillars. One pillar is relationships, so how children learn to relate with others in positive ways, how across different boundaries, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic groups, but also gender dynamics. The second one is ethical reflection dialogue, so how children realize themselves about these ethical challenges they live in the societies, exclusion, the prejudices, stereotypes that they are victims of, the violence they are victims of, but also the privileges that some of them have and how they can use those privileges also to change and address violence in their communities. So a lot of the emphasis of this approach is on creating what we call conscientization or like conscious. Conscientization is a word that was coined by Paulo Freire, that is a Brazilian educationalist that talk about the pedagogy of the oppressed. So in context of structural violence, how young people or people can address those issues and become aware of these, become conscious about these issues, and then do something to address those issues. So a lot of the pedagogy that we have is how children realize about this structural violence in their communities, and if they are part of that, and how they can address that with others. And of course, through dialogue. So it's individual responsibility, but also a collective responsibility with the other. And leading to collective actions is not enough if the child understands that there is discrimination, that there are injustice and violence, or that they are being victims of violence, but it's how they can address those. So it's very much on the agency of the child and initiating collective actions in their communities. And none of this can be possible unless we have a transformative pedagogy. I'm gonna explain a little bit about this later. And of course, the role of the teacher is critical in developing this pedagogy. And then on this side, you see, this is what we call competency clusters the competency clusters that we are addressing, and in those competency clusters, we have different knowledge, attitudes, and skills. So the first one is self-awareness, so how the child becomes aware of who he is, who she is, also where he or she comes from, maybe the violence experience at home, in the school, in society, and so on. How the child learns to appreciate differences and similarities with others, and therefore building positive relationship with others, but also a lot of the identity of the child, and particularly in the years, in the middle years of life, children develop also their identity, their sense of who they are in relationship with the other. And if the child is bullied, if the child is being violated in the rights, that same perception the child will have of himself or herself. So a lot of what we do is this understanding that they are not what society tells them that are, if they are victims of structural violence, but they are much more than that, and that they can develop their sense of who they are and lift up that to be able to create positive changes in their communities. The sense of interconnectedness, and it's the sense that no child or no one is an island. And we work a lot on this word Ubuntu from the Zulu language, I am because you are. And I think that's a very important aspect of this ethics approach, because that very much makes the children to develop positive relationship with the others, seeing the other as a human, affirming the human dignity of the other, engaging in dialogue and taking action. And for each of these areas, we have clusters and we have knowledge, attitude, and skills that are developed with this. Then when it comes to the transformative pedagogy, I was talking about this, we have these elements. So it has to be context sensitive, all the program implementation, because as I mentioned, we need to understand the dynamics that affect children, the violence, the societal violence, but violence that affect children individually. It cannot happen with lecturing children or with vertical approaches to learning. It has to be horizontal approaches, and there are collaborative, there are cooperative games, we use case studies, we use play, we use pedagogies that are engaging, and that children use dialogue to engage with one another. Supporting the learner-led action, so that at the end children can develop their own actions together with others. Creation of safe learning environments. We cannot talk about ethics and developing peaceful societies and so on if we don't talk about the violence that affects children, and we don't aim to create an environment that is safe for children to speak up, to relate to others, to be who they are with their own identities, and to be able to express themselves. And it's a whole school approach, and I think Yvonne talked about also this, how the culture in the school is positive and supportive of what we are trying to do, and of course the role modeling of the teacher. In the evaluation, we evaluated relevance and coherence of the program, more at the institutional level, and with the national education policies, effectiveness, and sustainability. For the data collection, we review key program documents from the Ministries of Education and policies and others that were used to embed the program into the national level. We use pre- and post-pilot surveys with all participating fellows. So we train kind of the trainers in the ministry level, and then they train the teachers, and then the teachers implemented the program. So we did the sample with the fellows, teachers, and we did key informal semi-structured interviews, focus group. We used the most significant change stories methodology, and we developed 6 country-specific case studies. So some of the kind of general findings: 100% of the teachers observed changes and progress in learners and classroom relations. 79% of the learners felt they had learned something new and reported improved confidence in competency domains, those competencies that I mentioned, mainly in developing relationship with others across cultures and religion, and also emotional regulation, so the management of their emotions, reacting when violence was perpetrated against them, how they resolve conflicts when they were bullied or when they saw violence. 76% of learners reported they can become friends with people from any culture, religion, or background. and learners reported they know how to talk and listen to others to help understand their points of view. So a lot on empathy with the other and how they can resolve conflicts. And some 63% reported they have actually started projects in their community. More concrete benefits, classroom had become more inclusive with frequent reports of changing attitudes towards diversity, particularly in those contexts where there are minority groups that are normally put aside. Teachers reported that those children from minority groups were more equipped to speak up, raise their hand, and ask a question, be more involved in groups. There was a shift towards a learner-centered pedagogy, and I think that was one of the main things we saw. Teachers are used to vertical ways of teaching, and this requires that the teacher use a horizontal approach, and so that shift was seen across the board. Improved classroom relationships, we've given priority to inclusion and celebration of diversity, learners reporting feeling happier and enjoying school more, so these social emotional aspects, self-confidence, particularly from the most vulnerable ones, and teachers cited examples of children making more ethical decisions or decisions that relate to, how they treat others. And we saw a decrease in bullying, name calling, shaming, and conflicts among the learners, as reported by the teachers and the students. We also saw a lot, and I think this is important, that the teachers are always at the center of this. Nothing can happen if the teacher is not equipped to create these safe learning environments, dialogue, and so on. And we saw an increased confidence in the teachers, particularly in some of the competencies, but mostly on helping children to nurture self-awareness, appreciating differences, and encouraging learners to take action. Also, I mean, not everything is positive. We also receive reports from teachers saying that they were not equipped to create dialogue or to talk about differences, religious differences, or to address issues of diversity in the classroom. So they didn't feel equipped to do it. And they said, we need more training because this is not enough for us. I'm going to pass quickly with some images here. 95% of the learners reported that they enjoyed the program, and 72% joined the program to a great extent. We evaluated several areas, and there were scores, and from the 22 areas that we evaluated that are based on the competences, 8 received much more results or better results from the children, and those were basically appreciating differences and similarities, awareness of religious and ethnic diversity, increasing relationship with others, better understanding of themselves, awareness of feelings, and management of emotions. And a lot of this is the development of more empathic relationships and children's ability to interact with others and address issues affecting them and their relationship with others. We also saw, and I think this is important, Jody and colleagues, that in some places they report an increased academic focus. And if we look at the INSPIRE, this is one of the benefits when we address violence in schools, that you see an increase in academic focus, children more willing to join classrooms. We saw an increased support and engagement by teachers. So it was reciprocal. So when children got more engaged, the teachers also felt that they were more helpful with the teachers, and that we saw improvement in learners' academic performance in some of the communities, but particularly was reported in places where children came from marginalized communities. And in terms of learners' mental well-being, we also was reporting improved over the course of the project, and that it was marginally, but results were statistically significant, meaning that this relationship was highly unlikely to have occurred by chance. And because a lot of what we saw was that because of the program, the children became more willing to participate, to speak up. They were not afraid to relate to others. So I think that was demonstrated through different means. So to finalize on the lessons learned, and this is my last slide. So one of the things that for continuity of the program needs to be embedded at the national level, because we are working with the Ministries of Education. So it's not a one-off program in some schools, but it's embedded in policy and program. And we have seen, for example, in Seychelles, where they have now created a whole unit on ethics education, and now they are reviewing curriculum. They are developing teacher national training modules for in-service and pre-service, and they have mobilized the entire island to integrate ethics education. We need a strong supportive training in ethics education approaches, the transformative pedagogy, and I think the pedagogy is critical because teachers are not equipped to create this kind of pedagogy in the classroom. They are afraid, and it is easier to go and lecture the child and create an environment where children can interact and you work with them. Wider mainstreaming in the school, and Yvonne, again, you spoke about this whole school approach to create a culture in the school. I think that was very critical, and we saw it in some schools, but not in all. Teachers require further extended support to create these safe learning environments, to promote dialogue, and that needs to be strengthened with in-service training that in many countries, there is no funding for in-service training. And preventing violence in schools require holistic approaches, changing pedagogy, creation of safe and inclusive learning environments, the training of teachers. We need the school leadership also involved, and the children's agency. And I want to reiterate that most of the things we see here is not the teacher trying to intervene when there is a violence against the other children, or trying to create by themselves a safe learning environment. It was with the children's agency asking for it, engaging better with the other children and taking the ownership to promote this environment. So I think I have gone over my time, and I apologize for that, and I leave it here. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Maria. That was excellent and really excellent work. I love how both of the presentations today had two completely different approaches, had different focuses, but you can see how both have a really important role to play in preventing violence against children in their unique ways. I really love how there's an emphasis on developing the child's critical thinking, empathy, empowerment, self-awareness, and I can really see how that can have quite a transformative, internally transformative for the child, which is really excellent. And that kind of continues into adulthood, which really is the key. So thank you so much, Maria. Thank you to Yvonne as well. So we have come to the end of the presentation portion for today. So I would like to open the floor for questions, comments, reflections. How does this impact your work? What resonated with you? Please feel free to pop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand as well. I have a couple of questions, but I think I will hold mine for the end. There is a question for you, Maria, in the chat from you. In the 6 countries, what were the age range of children in the program? How was the program run? Over what time? Was it during normal class time? And how were the teachers trained? Okay, that is many questions, but hopefully you can see it in the chat. Thank you very much, you.
Should I respond already, Jody?
I think so, because there are a couple of questions in there. I think so.
Yes. Okay, so the ages vary country to country, but I would say from 10 to 17 years old. But each country selected the children differently. In Indonesia, for example, they even work with early childhood, so they customize the materials and so on. And that was because they wanted this pilot to give them a sample of how they could then scale it up to the entire country. And so they wanted to be able to have a sample of early childhood, middle childhood, and primary and secondary education. The program was implemented over a period between 4 months to 9 months or 8 months. It was running throughout 2023, and it started in January in some places, and it ended in October. In others was really 4 months. And in some locations, it happened on a weekly basis. In some locations, it was integrated, for example, in Kenya, throughout the curriculum, and then there was a subject carrier that supported the process. And in some places, for example, in Mauritius, they wanted to have it with children of what they call more special education. And these were children that were lagging behind in academics, and they thought that it would be important for this group of children. That was not asked for. That was what was decided in Mauritius. The teachers ran the program, so we trained the trainers. So we brought all the trainers, 6 people per country. We brought them to Indonesia for 8 days, where we trained them all together on the pedagogy, on the approach. And then they went and conducted trainings with teachers in their locations with the support of a trainer from Arigato and other partner organizations. So we supported on-job training with them, but they led the trainings with the teachers. And then we have a community of practice with the main trainers every month where we provide additional training support, where they share the experiences, challenges, and so on. And as part of the monitoring evaluation process, we conducted focus group with the teachers also to share challenges and to support them in the process. They all receive a teacher training guide and an activity booklet with all the specification on activities. Yeah, so I think I responded to most of the questions.
Thank you very much, Maria. I hope that covered the questions. I do see a comment from Neo in the chat, but before we get there, I have a question, Yvonne, about are there referral pathways in place for if there's a case at the school that requires, outside support and response services?
Thank you so much, Jody. Yes, so what we did was we had to establish relationships with different organizations and institutions working on mental health issues in Uganda, and the services they offer, those that cost, that have costs and things like that, and those that were free. So we shared all that information with schools so they could reach out, but also while working with schools, we have also encouraged them to develop their own referral directories with services that are customized to their environment. For example, the health centers around them, there could be some counselors near them, there could be probably some religious groups offering certain services that may be unique to their communities. So while we offer at the national level, we also ask them to develop one that is customized to their communities. So they have both. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much, Yvonne. Please feel free to pop your questions and comments in the chat. Otherwise, raise your hand. We would love to hear your voice as well. I see a comment from Neo, who is expressing an experience that he had. He has a comment and would like to hear your views on this. I'm part of a safety patrolling team in my neighborhood. Recently, we were approached by the primary school about physical violence happening in the school. This is highly influenced by gangsterism, which is usually from a primary school. They have asked us to assist in reducing the violence as a patrolling team. What are your views on this? Does anyone have comments, or maybe another audience member has experience in doing this? We would love to hear your thoughts. Neo, do you perhaps want to unmute and you can elaborate a little bit more on your experience? Okay, I think, Ivana Marie, do you have any thoughts on this? Otherwise, we can come back to this in a little bit.
So maybe briefly, for Uganda, we've not yet experienced so much the problem of gangism, but what we do is while we prevent violence against children in school, we also have an aspect of the community engagement, where we work with parents from the children in those surrounding communities. We train them, provide them with resources, but we also work with the community leaders. So the parents and the lead teachers conduct some kind of mapping exercise. We discovered it's a lot easier to work in the community when you're working with police, you're working with local councils, you're working with the probation officers. We also do a lot of work with media and run campaigns. And that has helped a lot to help that, while we are addressing the violence at school, we are also helping to address the violence in the communities and in their homes. So that has been our experience, that while you work with schools, you also need to pay attention to the communities and the homes where these children are coming from. And so we have an arm of our work called community activism that is probably similar to the safety patrolling that Neo is talking about. And that mainly looks to conduct mapping exercises with the community leaders, but also hold dialogues, hold community events, and things like that, really helping communities know how they can take active roles in preventing violence in their communities. I don't know if I answered the question, but briefly, that's what our experience is.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Maria, any thoughts on this one?
Yes, I wanted to say we work in El Salvador from 2015 until 2018 or so in a program in addressing gang violence and addressing the risk of children getting into gangs in El Salvador, that, as you might know, it was very high at that time. And so very similar to what Yvonne was saying, we also engage the community because in El Salvador in particular, if children, the people say there are two ways to get out of a gang. Either you are killed or you enter a church or a religious community. So we work very closely with the religious community as well to address the issues. We train also faith-based actors, and we work together with them. And then we went to the schools. Also similar to what Yvonne was saying, one of the activities we do is mapping the places where children feel safe in and out of school and where children feel unsafe. And then that creates a space for children to start speaking about the issues. And of course, with the teachers, we did also a lot of training and support to address these issues because, of course, teachers are afraid to address these issues because of gangs. So I do think that it requires a community approach to address the issues when gang violence has taken up the schools, and because many of the children are recruited outside the school and even within the school. So that requires a whole school approach. So maybe I just leave it there.
Thanks very much, Maria. I hope that offers some insight, Neo. I see a whole lot of questions and comments in the chat, which is great. Please keep them coming. Yvonne, a couple of questions for you from Gerard. I think you've touched on some of these in your presentation as well. 3 questions here. What was the impetus for developing the model? Did you experience any challenges in developing or implementing the model? That's a really good question. And how did learners respond, which I think you have touched on a little bit. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you, Jody. The real reason why we decided to develop this module was because we had the assumption that when you prevent violence using the Good School Toolkit, then it would address automatically. But like I said earlier, there are some challenges that may not necessarily be a result of violence. For example, grief, lack of basic needs. So we decided to do something in addition to the Good School Toolkit that would be tailored specifically to mental health. And that is what led us into developing this module. And then some of the challenges, of course, there have been challenges. One of them is really around managing teacher expectations. Like every time they say an intervention, even if it's something for them, they'll tell you we are getting paid. Because we did it when one of the universities was also doing a similar project in another school. And every time they had a training with teachers on stress management and things like that, they would give them money. So it became very hard for those teachers even to hold discussions about mental health in their own schools. So those are some of the challenges around implementation. But like I also said earlier, while the children really accepted the module, they ran with it, teachers, because of their busy schedules, especially in secondary schools, in Uganda, it's very hard to find a teacher in one school when they get to high school. Then about 3 or 4 schools at the same time trying to make, earn a living. And so it becomes really hard for these learners to receive support and also the consistency of the trainings. There are schools we went to and teachers had only 2 discussions out of the 6, because sometimes when the discussions are happening, they are not in the school at that particular time. And then the other thing also was like there was really a big demand for us to take the module to the communities as well. Children were reporting taking some of these cartoon booklets to their parents. There's a girl who said how her mom had been suicidal several times, and she gave this mom the cartoon booklet, and it just had somewhere where there's an illustration using cartoons, and it's saying you're a champion. And she said that really changed her mom's perspective. And so her mom now picked interest in learning more about mental health and even seeking therapy. So the one thing that came out was that this needs to reach the communities, but the intervention at that time was made strictly for schools. And so there was also a bit of a limitation, but overall it was highly welcomed by the children. They really embraced it at both primary and secondary school level, and they were able to use it in ways that we thought were really meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That's really great. Great to hear that it was going to the parents and the families as well. I see a question from Moise for both speakers. How much influence did the concerned governments have on both programs? For example, were they able to directly make changes and contribute towards the curriculum development, or were the governments only there as national entities that did not have a direct influence on the program, as well as how was the overall experience working with governments? I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Moise. Maria, would you like to address the question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So our program relies on the ownership of the governments. And so, yes, they had influence in how to adapt the program to their own national priorities. So we asked them to have consultations in the beginning with different education stakeholders to understand where does this initiative fit into what they are already doing. Peace education programs, violence prevention programs, or what they were already doing and how this can be supportive. So for instance, in Indonesia, they decided to use it as part of what they call the Pancasila student profile. So the Pancasila are 5 principles of the Constitution that they want children to uphold. And so this was a good opportunity for them to work on something practical and equip the teachers to address some of the things that through this Pancasila student profile project they have, which addresses issues of learning to live together, violence in school, through creating unity in diversity and addressing other issues. So that was customized by the government in Indonesia. In Kenya, they have the values-based education curriculum already that was part of the curriculum review that took place 5 years ago in the country. So then they adapted this ethics education to complement the values-based education curriculum. So they were part of the process. And now in the second phase, I didn't mention, so now the idea is that they scale it up to the entire country, either because they review the curriculum and they look into how this can be integrated, to they develop in-service and pre-service teacher training modules, and they customize materials. So some of the countries are asking for customization of materials, new activities to different ages where they haven't implemented, like early childhood now has been a priority for Seychelles and Indonesia. And so it's been adapted by the countries. And we have told them that it's their own kind of responsibility to do that. And we provide some technical guidance and support when they request it.
Thanks very much, Maria. Yvonne, any insights on collaborating with government?
Thank you so much, Maria. And I think our experience has not been so different from Maria's. We've had a lot of support and goodwill. You know, sometimes in the past, it would be who brings the money to the table for the collaboration. But this time, one, because the concept of mental health is a bit new to our schools. And so it was about until last year that the technical working group on mental health was actually established. It was there, but it wasn't active. And so last year it was really active. So the government is very receptive to any intervention that is seeking to address the mental health problems of learners in schools. And then one feedback we also got that was most of the interventions that were there were more of responsive, responding, you know, the psychosocial therapies, the group therapies, but there was no intervention that was looking at the prevention. And so it was very easy for us to find our way in. They really accepted it. We shared what we had. They also provided insights and looked out for opportunities where we could integrate what they already had into this module, and even offered that it could be taken on as a national guide. So as we speak at the moment, the module, we are waiting for the permanent secretary to sign it off. And once it's signed off, it's going to be launched. And once it's launched, it can be accessed by anyone in Uganda and used in different ways. But we really had a lot of goodwill. We had a lot of support, and they actually provided the content and some of the ideas that we integrated into the module. And that was our experience. And all this we did at no cost. It was just the relationship and the need they saw for what this module would do in schools. And so it has really been a pleasant experience, especially on this particular piece of work.
Wow, that's excellent. Congratulations, Yvonne. And I think what you're saying about the relationships is really important. And I think in South Africa, we're discovering that the relationships we have with different sectors working to prevent violence really is the key in many ways. One more question for you, Maria, from Jody in the chat. How are the implementing teachers chosen? Are there any incentives to keep them motivated in doing what must be done over and above their normal workload? That's a really good question, because I'm sure this is the case in many countries, but especially in South Africa, teachers are already overstretched and overworked. So how did they respond to that?
Yes, and we saw that in part of the evaluation, where we saw some of the challenges was that, teachers were doing in some cases part of extracurricular activities to do the implementation, because some did it in the curriculums and others did it through the peace clubs or ethics clubs that are in the school, which are part of extracurricular activities for children. And then others did it to complement some learning. So it depends on the country, but the teachers are chosen by the Ministry of Education, because the ministry decides on how the pilot will take place, in which schools, in which areas, geographical areas, and so on. And so they choose the schools, and the schools decide which classrooms and so on. So that was the process. We were not really involved. And then there was the other question, and how to keep them motivated. So, for example, in Bangladesh, for this particular project, we provide funding to the countries. It's not much funding, but to do the trainings and keep some level of implementation. But we know that in some countries, for instance, in Bangladesh and Nepal, they give a DSA to the teachers for some activities that they conduct. And so I think that's one aspect, because in many of these locations, teachers are not well paid. So when we're asking them, we want to evaluate also, and this will be part of a process, it requires that implementation is done in proper ways. So that's one, but we also did a lot of focus group with the teachers to keep them involved and engaged. There were WhatsApp groups where teachers shared their pictures, their challenges, and we saw these groups really, really active and dynamic, sharing some of the experiences. And we also invited the teachers to be part of the community of practice. So we did several webinars with them to feel that they are part of something that is global, that is not just in their country, but the others in other parts of the world that are doing similar things. And as we also engage a lot in advocacy strategies, sometimes we ask for teachers to send videos of their experiences and so on. So I think that also keeps them motivated, that this is an important work that they are doing. So these are some of the aspects that we have used. But I want to say that for the DSA, it's not a must. And it didn't happen in all locations. Like in Indonesia, this was not the case. It did happen in other locations where it was kind of compulsory, because that's how they operate in a way. And we couldn't really have a say in how the governments decided on how to do it.
No, that makes sense. Thanks very much, Maria. Okay, I think I am watching the time. Any other final questions or comments? If not, we have one more question. What would your suggestion be for children living in countries where continuous conflict prevails, like Ethiopia? I guess in the implementation of your specific programs.
Well, I would say, Birhanu, that let's implement the program in Ethiopia. We did have some conversations with the Minister of Education in Ethiopia about potential training of teachers on this program, but it didn't materialize. But I do think that in Ethiopia, with the current ethnic and conflict situation, it would be important to have a program like this where you help the education, help children to develop skills that help them to live together with others, to address conflicts, to learn nonviolent alternatives to conflicts. Because I'm from Colombia, coming from a country like Colombia, where structural violence is normalized and it gets into how you operate as a child in the community, it is important that education addresses violence in the community and help deconstruct that violence and denormalize violence in the lives of children, including the way we see the other and how the other is showcased and spoken about by the members of our community and so on.
Yeah, excellent response. Another question, Maria, is your program still available to remain countries? I'm sure there's a very long process before that happens, but is that
Yeah, so maybe I have to clarify that this particular program is what we call Ethics Education Fellowship. We work with ministries of education to integrate it in the system. So this is a program that we are doing at this point with 6 countries, and until this next year, goes until September next year. And we are analyzing the possibility of a new cohort of countries within this framework. But as Arigato International, and this is a program, the Ethics Education Fellowship, it runs with other partners as well. But as Arigato, we also have our training programs on learning to live together. So it's similar, but it doesn't require kind of the full leadership of the Ministry of Education. We can work with the schools, with civil society organizations, and train them in the program. And we use also similar tools and so on. So we have a lighter approach that doesn't require kind of the full ownership of the ministries of education, and we can work with civil society organizations and schools and so on.
Thanks, Maria. I think if you are interested and want to find out more, please feel free to email our panelists as well. Any other questions? A final round. I think this has been a really two excellent presentations with really important insights. If there are no other questions or comments, I think I will use my powers as chair to end 15 minutes earlier. I know we were all very busy, very busy people. So thank you very much again, Maria and Yvonne, for participating and for sharing your really excellent work that you are doing in your organizations. A recording of this webinar will be available very shortly afterwards. Please feel free to share it with your networks, and please be on the lookout for future webinars. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day, and have a lovely day further. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jody.